Welcome to Amici, news and insight from a New York court. I'm John Caher. Our guest today is a man who grew up in poverty and occasionally in homeless shelters with parents who were addicted to drugs. Somehow, some way, that least likely to succeed young man, with all the odds stacked against him, is now an acting New York State Supreme Court Justice in the Bronx. The Honorable Raymond P. Fernandez worked his way through John Jay College of Criminal Justice and CUNY Law School, and clerked for three judges, including Court of Appeals Judge Jenny Rivera, before Governor Hochul appointed him to the Court of Claims 2 years ago. He was promptly designated an acting Supreme Court Justice by Chief Administrative Judge Joseph Zayas. Judge, thank you for coming on, Amici. Tell me about your home life as a child, if you would.
Well, first, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate your interest in me foremost. So I was born and raised in New York City. My family and I spent the first couple years of my life navigating the New York City shelter system. We were homeless until ultimately, when I was about 6 years old, we settled in Spanish Harlem. And so Spanish Harlem is where I was raised. That's where I went to school. My home life. Getting right into it, huh, John?
Sure am.
My home life was difficult. My home life was difficult. My parents were very badly addicted to drugs, and they had been my entire life. I was born into that situation with them. And so my home life was difficult. We lacked a lot of the very basics. We often didn't have food. Very, very basic things that, we take for granted: soap, deodorant, toilet paper, things like that. The electricity was often cut off, so it was, it'd be dark in our apartment. I had no means it was rough. I didn't really have proper clothes. I had no means to wash my clothes, no way to do laundry. So it was hard. It was very hard. That was the hallmark of my home life until, for all of my childhood.
So until you were six, you're moving from one homeless shelter to another, basically?
Yeah, so that's right. So when I was born, my father was the super of a building. He was the super of a building on 29th and Lexington Avenue. And that came with an apartment. He was a live-in super, and he lost that job. And when he lost that job, we lost the apartment. So the marshals had removed us from that apartment. So we entered the shelter system, and I was very little. I remember some of it. I was very little, but back then in the early 90s, New York City was grappling with a homelessness crisis. And so it was like a congregate shelter. I remember other families being there. I remember it being a big space. I remember sleeping on a cot, things like that. And then you sort of advance through the shelter system into what they call tier two housing. I don't know if this still exists today, but tier two was still a homeless shelter, but more private space. This is when you get an apartment. This is when you get a door that locks. And so we advanced into the tier two system until finally we were approved for Section 8. And that's how we got the apartment in Spanish Harlem, was through the Section 8 program.
So you're 5, 6 years old, you're in Spanish Harlem, you're starting school. What were your early days in school like? Did the other kids know what your home life was like? Was it embarrassing for you?
It was yes, it was difficult. A neighborhood so big is still a neighborhood so small. So everybody knew who my parents were. Everybody knew, you don't want to be the little kid that goes to school and everybody's like that, your mommy and daddy are crackheads. You know what I mean? So it was very, very difficult. Everybody knew who my parents were. You could see my father outside collecting cans. You could see my mother outside collecting cans. Digging through the garbage for things that they could sell. So everyone knew. Everyone knew, and I was tormented. I really was. I was constantly made fun of. I had a very disheveled appearance. My clothes were. I didn't have many clothes, but what I did have was, tattered and filthy. Mismatch, never weather appropriate. I didn't really have a warm jacket in the winter. Um, My appearance was often disheveled. No one paid for me to get a haircut, so I had very long, unkept hair. So it was very, very difficult. Kids can be very cruel, and they were.
What about the teachers? They must have known.
Teachers knew, and I had teachers that I had some of the best teachers, and I had many teachers that took a real interest in me. And I was always told when I was little I was a smart kid. I was always told I was smart. I was always told I could write very well. That's something I remember going back all the way to. I was probably in maybe sixth grade when I was told, you write really, really well. Why don't you write more? Why don't you write stories or something? And I was like, huh, okay, interesting. As far as what was going on at home, I mean, I'm certain teachers must have known what was up because, no one ever went to like a parent teacher conference. There was no, this was before cell phones. We didn't have a house phone. So it's not like you can call my house to reach a parent. So it's basically like, as long as I was showing up, there must have been some sort of adult, interaction at home. But that was it. But I had some of the very best teachers. I remember I was probably seventh or eighth grade. I think it was eighth grade. Um, and I didn't have a jacket. I was wearing like a windbreaker in the middle of February. And I remember a teacher who I'm friends with to this day. Um, Her and another teacher had bought me a jacket. They'd bought me a winter coat. And they had held me after class to sort of give it to me, and they gave it to me in private, and it was very, very kind, and I'll never forget that kindness. So there were many teachers back then that it didn't give rise. I guess they didn't see anything that they felt they needed to report to any authority, but they definitely knew what was going on. It wasn't hard by looking at me to know that I didn't come from much.
Interesting to know that a random act of kindness a few decades ago resonates with you still.
Yeah, John, I'll never forget it. That teacher was at my wedding. We're very close friends to this day. I'm supposed to have dinner with her soon. We're very close friends.
What a
to this
wonderful
day.
story.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
did there come a time when you made a decision to climb out of what seemed to be your destiny?
Yeah, I mean, climb out is climbing is the operative word here. I was probably I'm trying to think about how old I was at the time. I was young. I had to be about 12 or 13 years old. And I was a big Yankee fan. I'm still to this day a very big Yankee fan. It means the world to me that my chambers look at Yankee Stadium. It means the world to me because when I had nothing, I had the Yankees because I could follow them on the radio, right? I could listen to baseball. And so it was a season when we didn't have electricity, and it was dark in the apartment, and the Yankees were in the World Series. And it was something. It had to be 1998. It was an incredible team, a storybook team, and it was a World Series game. I don't remember which one, but I was sitting with my father in a bedroom. It was dark. We had a candle lit, and we were listening to the game on a small single speaker radio. It was battery operated. It had like one AA battery in it or something. And we were listening to the game, and mid game that battery died. And it was just it's the story. The more I think of it, the more it almost seems silly. But that was my breaking point. That battery died, and I couldn't hear the rest of that game. And I was like, this is just it's one thing after. I was just so fed up. I was so frustrated. It's one thing after another, and that just broke me. I can't even listen to a ball game like this. Nothing about the way I came up was ever normal. But to not even be able to just listen to a ball game on a rate never mind. We don't have electricity. You don't have another AA battery. I was just so frustrated, and so I said, I'm not going to live like this. I don't want to be this way. I don't want to be with these people. I love my parents very much. But I don't need to be like them, and I don't need to be with them. I don't need to be here. And so I told myself, this is it. Nothing's going to be given to me. I have to take it. And so I made a plan that I was just one day at a time. How do you build a wall? Brick by brick, one brick at a time. I am going to climb out of this. It has to be me. The cavalry's not coming. No one's going to come rescue me from this. I have to do it. And I had hatched a plan that the way to do it was through school. Maybe that's something I saw on an after school special. Maybe I saw it on a poster at school, but like I saw school as my ticket out of that situation. And so I said that, it's got to be me. I have to set the alarm. No one was waking me up for school. I have to set my alarm clock, and I have to get out of bed on my own. And if John, I know you have kids, I have kids. Yeah, I go away. I got to kick my kid out of bed every morning. All right, honey, time to go pick out her clothes. And then I got to get her to school. I got to make sure she eats breakfast. I had none of that. It was me. When that alarm goes off and it's 5 degrees outside and you got to walk to school, that's hard to do when you're like 12, 13 and there's no adult telling you that you have to do it. It took a lot of foresight. I was just forced to grow up at such a young age, but that was my epiphany. That was my moment. That game. It was the '98 Yankees. That battery died, and I had just about had it. And I was like,
That's fa-
I'm gonna do this.
that's fascinating because the normal trajectory would be someone growing up like you follows the pattern that they were used to. Why do you think you were able to see that there was something better and that it was potentially open to you if you took the initiative?
I don't know. I wish I knew. If there was I wish I had some sort of secret formula that I could share with the world so that I could help anybody else who's feeling the same way. If I could bottle whatever I had when I was 13 and that battery died, I would share it with the world. I really would. I just, it must have been teachers who told me I was smart. I must have just known that school would be my ticket out. And I must have it's the only thing I can think because I remember being like, okay, this is it. Like school is it. Like, and then the other part of it was I knew that if I could just get through, you get through school one day at a time, one week at a time, one semester at a time, one year at a time. And so I knew that by pushing my way through school, if I could just get to college, no one will know me. Okay, I'll have a fresh start. No one will know who my parents are, right? So it became my mission, like just get through this year, this day, this week, this year, and you'll get to a place where no one knows you. You'll start fresh, and then that'll be your ticket. It's always I was just always chasing some light at the end of the tunnel that I just had to tell myself that was there. It was blind faith. It really was.
So then I think you eventually end up at John Jay College. Is that correct?
I do. So I did that. I pushed through high school and I applied to all of the CUNY schools and I got into John Jay and it's exactly what I knew it would be. I showed up for class and I was a stranger. No one knew who I was, no one knew who my parents were. Everything was a fresh start. The one thing about college is everybody's paying to be there, so no one's horsing around, there's no distractions in class, everyone is quiet, there's no fights, there's nothing like that. Like everybody who's there is dead serious about it. They want to be there, so that was really a fresh start for me. And I just had to make it work. And so I was going to school and by then I had started working. And so what I did was I went to school full time and I worked full time. So I would go to school Tuesdays and Thursdays, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And then every other day of the week I worked. I held restaurant jobs. I had every job that you could hold in a restaurant. I was a waiter, a busboy. I was at one point a line cook. I was a food runner. I was a bar back. I was a bartender. I did every single job you could do in a restaurant, and I liked it. I liked being. I liked the service industry. I liked meeting different people, communicating with different people, seeing people from all walks of life. And it got to be really funny where it was like I was working so much that when I got to go to school for those 12 hours, I used to call that my day off because I got to sit down. So,
Oh my goodness.
I just was trying to build something, just trying to do something for myself.
There's some very influential people who, let's be honest, didn't need to give you the time of day, and they did. Judge Rivera, Judge Abdisalam, Judge Zayas, Judge Ruiz, Judge Gonzalez.
Yeah.
What is the importance of mentoring?
Oh, I can't, it's not even, John, it's so interesting. It's not even like mentoring. You'd say mentoring like like you meet someone and you take them under your wing. It's just being kind to someone, giving someone the time of day. I have a rule. It's not posted anywhere in my courtroom, but I have a rule that whenever a child is present in my courtroom, they get to sit on my bench. Whether it's for an infant comp, whether one of the attorneys doesn't have childcare, so they kind of sneak one of their kids in to add an appearance. If a child comes into courtroom 625 in the Bronx, they are invited to sit on my bench because you just don't know who needs to do that. You just don't know. You ask a kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a lawyer. Good. That's incredible. That's incredible. If I can help you along the way, That's you sometimes, sometimes mentoring is just believing in someone. The fact that Judge Zaya said okay when I said I wanted to be a judge instead of, there were plenty of other people I said I want to be a judge. Wow, I don't know. When I left my one of my law firms, the partner, he was a nice guy. The partner who was my managing partner, he goes, you got a long road ahead of you, kid. I mean, the political machine doesn't work this quick. And I just kind of nodded my head and said, okay, that's all right. I know. I appreciate that. I'll figure it out. You know, um, just believing in someone can be enough. And so any child that it comes into my courtroom sits on my bench. Anyone.
That's wonderful. That is wonderful. Now, is serving on the bench further fulfillment of that promise you made to God in the movie theater?
Yeah, I think so. My goal has always been to touch as many lives as I can. And I think I do that. I think I do that. Whether it's the kids who come in and get to sit on the bench, whether it's kids that I talk to that visit my courtroom, public service in general is what I promised to do, and it's what I'm doing. One case at a time, moving one case at a time, even if I can only
How do
move it
you
an inch forward.
how do you think your background impacts the way you judge, the way you look at the world as a judge?
I have a lot more empathy. I have a lot more empathy. When people are in litigation, it's obviously very adversarial and tempers can flare. And there's always something behind anger. You know what I mean? There's always anger masks a real emotion. And so given how I came up, I'm always wondering what people's motivations are, right? You're angry about this, but why? And if you can get to the heart of why people are angry about something, and if you can sort of divorce them from their emotional connection to something, you can settle a case. You can settle a dispute. You can move a case forward. Um, so yeah, it does.
Now, I'm sure you're very busy with your job, and I know you have a growing family, including a newborn child.
Yes.
But I notice you're active in the Latino Judges Association. And you serve as co-chair of the 12th JD Equal Justice Committee. Why do you make time for things like that?
The answer, John, is I haven't made enough time recently. Because I have my 8-year-old daughter, because my wife was pregnant, and because now we have our little boy, I haven't made nearly enough time for any of the associations that I need to make time for. But I will get better. I will get much better. I will commit to it as my little boy gets just a little bit bigger. I will go back and I will get better. Um, Listen, we live in a time right now where the word diversity has been politicized. And, the term DEI has become derogatory somehow. And so I will just say this. When you walk in to your local courthouse, the people that work there should look like the community they serve. Full stop. Full stop. I don't know. I don't understand how this is, I'm not interested in debating this. That's just the way it goes. And so organizations like LJA, my work with Equal Justice, that is what those organizations are meant to do, to make sure that, the more diverse the decision makers are at a table, the better the results, period. I mean, that's science. That's science. That's not political rhetoric. That is science. So I'll leave it at that.
I'm sure at the Court of Appeals you saw exactly that. I mean, you had 7 people, all highly intelligent, all rather opinionated, probably some of them a little stubborn, but from entirely different backgrounds. And that would work its way into a very solid foundation in the law, right? Isn't that the
Yeah.
idea?
Yeah. Yeah. More voices, better results. More voices, more backgrounds, more opinions yield better results. More inclusion. Period. And inclusion is not a bad word. But I don't want to say more again because somehow it's been politicized. I don't want to say more, but that's a fact.
It is a fact. Something that sticks out to me prominently listening to your story is an absence of the victim mentality and a focus, and ever since your Yankee game epiphany, on creating a better life for yourself. Is that innate or something you learned along the way, not to have a victim mentality and to be focused?
You
Where's
know,
that come
I
from?
I think it's innate. It has to be. I just absolutely refuse to be like my parents. You know, I didn't have any role models growing up, but I had people that I didn't want to be like. You know, and I didn't see any way around it. I had to just go through it. And that's it. And that's it. How do you build a wall? Brick by brick. And so I built it brick by brick. That was the best I can do. One rung of the ladder at a time.
And finally, how can someone growing up in an environment similar to yours learn to stand on top of rather than be buried underneath their past?
Again, I think it was Dr. Maya Angelou who said, we don't choose what happens to us, but we can choose not to be reduced by it. It's sometimes you can't go around, you have to go through it. And if you're going through it, keep going. Keep going. One step at a time. Take a look at your environment. What can you control, right? Are you in school? Okay, you're in school. Can you go to school? Yeah. So go to school. Can you focus in class? Focus in class. One step at a time. What can you control? Because too often we look at things and all we see are obstacles. And if all you see are obstacles, you're not going to get anywhere. But what can you control? And so it's one step at a time. It's one day at a time, 1 week at a time, 1 month at a time, 1 year at a time. And things get better. They get better. Hard work ultimately pays dividends.
What a wonderful and inspiring message. Judge, thank you so much for your time and thank you so much for your service.
John, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.